I'm in the middle of making a Harry Potter history series, and so far I've made a video covering the 1300s to the 1500s, and another video covering the 1600s to the 1700s. If you want to watch those, they are linked down below. Today, we're going to do a little history lesson on the American wizarding government called MACUSA, and I'm going to go over its history and origin. We've seen MACUSA in the Fantastic Beasts films, so we already know a little bit about it, but hopefully by the end of this video, you're an expert in the history of MACUSA, and you can appreciate and understand the Fantastic Beasts films a little better than you already did. Before we start, there are going to be spoilers for the Fantastic Beasts films, so you've been warned. Now, let's get the video started. MACUSA stands for the Magical Congress of the United States of America, and it was created in 1693. Following the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy, meaning witches and wizards were now forced to hide their magic from muggles, which had not been the case in the past, wizards worldwide had reached a tipping point, and thinking they could lead happier and freer lives, they built an underground community that offered its own support and its own structures. And this was a feeling that was especially strong in America, which was in large part due to the Salem witch trials. MACUSA was modeled on the Wizards' Council of Great Britain, the thing that came before the Ministry of Magic, which wasn't formed until 1707, a good 14 years after MACUSA was formed. Representatives from the magical communities all over North America were elected to MACUSA, and their job was to make laws that both policed and protected American witches and wizards. In the beginning, MACUSA's primary aim was to rid the continent of scourers. Scourers were corrupt wizards who had hunted their fellow magical beings for personal gain, which I talked about a great deal in my last wizarding history video from the 1600s to the 1700s, which again is linked down below. The very first thing that MACUSA did after forming was bring these scourers to justice. The second great law enforcement challenge was the large number of wizarding criminals who had fled to America from Europe and beyond, precisely because America had no type of government put into place yet, meaning that these criminals could go into hiding there. But man, were they surprised when MACUSA formed and took almost all of these criminals down and brought them to justice. The first president of MACUSA was Josiah Jackson, a warlike wizard who was voted in by his fellow representatives. They voted him in because they considered him tough enough to deal with the difficulties of the post-Salem witch trials era. In the beginning of MACUSA, they had no fixed location or meeting place. They would hold meetings in all different locations every time, and this made them have to be really careful to avoid Muggle detection. Being so tough and warlike, President Jackson's immediate priority was to recruit and train Aurors, dark wizard catchers who are basically the wizarding world's police. The names of the first dozen volunteers to train as Aurors in the US have a special place in United States wizarding history. There were so few of them, and the challenges that they faced were so great that they knew taking on this job could mean death. The descendants of these witches and wizards that volunteered have been given a particular respect in the US ever since. When looking at the list of the original 12, there is of course one name that sticks out more than any other, and that is Abraham Potter. Centuries later, historians would uncover that he was in fact related to Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Unfortunately, Abraham Potter and many other of the original 12 Aurors for the US would never reach old age, as all but two of them died. Charity Wilkinson and Theodore Fontaine were the only two who survived, and Charity Wilkinson would actually go on to be the president for MACUSA. And something interesting about Fontaine, he was a direct descendant of the current day headmaster of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Another notable name of the original 12 Aurors is Gondolphus Graves, as his family still remains influential in American wizarding politics, and we actually saw who we thought was a member of the Graves family in the first Fantastic Beasts film, though it turned out to be Grindelwald disguised as Graves. America remained one of the most hostile environments for magical people, mainly because of the Scourer descendants, as many of the most powerful Scourers escaped and vanished permanently into the Muggle community. Here they started families with Muggles, and they had squibs, and they told their squib children who told their Muggle children that magic was very much alive and that they should hate these wizards and witches. This was another thing that I covered in the last video in great detail, so again that's linked down below. There was a role that was created in the American wizarding government called Keeper of Treasure and Dragons. Breaking this down, the Dragot is the American wizarding currency, and the Keeper of Dragons, as the title implies, is roughly the equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury. In the wizarding government, this person is handpicked by the president, and this person plays a big role in MACUSA. Going back to MACUSA not having a location, they eventually made a large enchanted building in the Appalachian Mountains which they used for MACUSA's headquarters. But over time, this became an inconveniently remote location, especially because they were meeting in large cities more and more, so it became clear that this location just wouldn't work. They eventually began making their headquarters wherever the current president lived, and in 1760, MACUSA relocated to Williamsburg, Virginia, home of a president named Thornton Harkaway. One of Harkaway's hobbies was breeding Krupps, dogs that closely resemble Jack Russell's apart from the forked tail. The Krupps' devotion to wizards is only surpassed by its aggression toward muggles, and unfortunately, Harkaway's pack went after several local muggles who afterwards were only able to bark for a period of 48 hours. This breach of the statute of secrecy led to Harkaway leaving office in disgrace. It also might not be a coincidence that Williamsburg was the first city in the US to have a dedicated psychiatric hospital. Many patients were admitted, claiming to have seen weird things, all being sighted near Harkaway's house, meaning that because of Harkaway, these muggles were admitted for being crazy, when in fact they were totally sane and had just seen magic from Harkaway. After Harkaway left office, MACUSA relocated to Baltimore, where President Abel Fleming lived. But the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, followed by the arrival of the Muggle Congress on July 4th, 1776, it made MACUSA nervous, and they relocated to what is now known as Washington, no longer following where the president lived. It is here that President Elizabeth McGillicuddy presided over the infamous Country of Kind debate in 1777. Thousands of witches and wizards from all over America descended upon MACUSA to attend this extraordinary meeting, and so many people showed up that they had to magically enlarge the place to fit everyone. The issue for discussion was, did the magical community owe their highest allegiance to the country in which they had made their home, or to the global underground wizarding community? Breaking that down, it basically meant, were they morally obligated to join the American Muggles in their fight for liberation from the British Muggles in the Revolutionary War, or was this simply put, not their fight? The arguments for and against intervention became vicious. Those that wanted to intervene argued that they might be able to save lives, while those that did not want to intervene argued that wizards risked their own life security by revealing themselves in battle. Messengers were sent to the Ministry of Magic in London to ask whether they intended to fight, and a 4-word message returned saying, "Sitting this one out." The American president, McGillicuddy's famous response was even shorter, saying, "Mind you do." While officially the American witches and wizards did not engage in battle, unofficially there were many instances of intervention to protect Muggle neighbors, and when the fight was finally over, the American witches and wizards celebrated Independence Day along with the rest of the American society. One of the most significant American magical laws was created in 1790, and this would pretty much define the American wizarding government for well over a century to come. MACUSA approved a law that said there had to be a total segregation between the wizarding community and the Muggle community. It was called Rappaport's Law, named after the then president Emily Rappaport, and it was created after one of the worst breaches of the International Statute of Secrecy. This is a very interesting story in MACUSA history, and I'm going to break it down for you guys, because I think this is a key factor in the history of the American wizarding government. The story starts with the daughter of Aristotle Twelvetrees, who at the time was President Rappaport's trusted keeper of treasure and dragons. Twelvetrees was a competent man, but his daughter Dorcas was pretty dim. She lived at home with her father, and she hardly ever performed magic, as she was too focused on her looks and going to parties. One day, Dorcas became infatuated with a handsome muggle named Bartholomew Barebone. What Dorcas did not know about Barebone was that he was a muggle descendant of a Scourer. Because of his great-great-grandfather, Barebone's belief in magic was profound and unshakable, and as was his conviction that all witches and wizards were evil. To impress Barebone, Dorcas used magic to show off little tricks, being completely oblivious to the danger this put her in. Barebone's good looks and charm eventually made Dorcas tell him about MACUSA and Overmorny, along with information about the International Confederation of Wizards and how they worked hard to hide the wizarding world from Muggles. Having gathered as much information as he could from Dorcas, Barebone stole her wand, showed it to as many pressmen as he could find, then gathered together armed friends and set out to persecute and ideally kill all witches and wizards they could find. Barebone also printed leaflets giving the address of where witches and wizards congregated, information that Dorcas had given him. Barebone also sent letters to prominent muggles, some of whom felt it necessary to investigate further and see if there really was magic being hidden at these locations. Giddy with his mission to expose witchcraft in America, Barebone overstepped himself by shooting at what he believed to be a group of MACUSA wizards, but they turned out to be muggles who had the misfortune to leave the suspected building while Barebone was watching. Fortunately, no one was killed, and Barebone was arrested and imprisoned for his crime without any need for MACUSA to get involved. Though he was locked up, this was not the last we would see of the Barebone family, as we met Mary Lou Barebone in the first Fantastic Beasts film, and she was of course a descendant of the same Scour, meaning she was told of the existence of wizards from a young age, and was taught to hate them and want their downfall, which was very clear with everything we saw of her in the Fantastic Beasts movie. Though Barebone was locked up, he had spread his leaflets very well and it had reached many people, and on top of that, a few newspapers had taken him seriously enough to print pictures of Dorcas's wand, and in the article, they note that it had a kick to it like a mule if you waved it. The attention focused on the MACUSA building was so intense that they were forced to move its location again. Though this time they stayed in the same general area in Washington, they just switched buildings. President Rappaport was forced to tell the International Confederation of Wizards that she could not be sure she had obliviated every last person that had either seen the leaflets, been told through word of mouth, or had read the articles published. The leak had been so serious that the after effects would be felt for many years to come. Although many witches and wizards campaigned to have Dorcas imprisoned for life or even executed, Dorcas spent only a year in jail. When released, she entered a very different wizarding world in America, and being disgraced by all wizards, she ended her days in seclusion. All of this led to Rappaport's Law being born. It enforced strict segregation between the Muggle community and the wizarding community. Wizards were no longer allowed to befriend or marry Muggles, and the punishment for doing so was very harsh. Communication with Muggles was now limited to only what was deemed necessary to perform daily activities. Rappaport's Law is one thing that created a huge cultural difference between the American wizarding community and that of Europe. In Europe, there had always been a degree of interaction and cooperation, the Minister of Magic even meeting with the Muggle Prime Minister from time to time. But in America, MACUSA acted totally independently of the Muggle government. Muggles were increasingly regarded as the enemy, something that only helped tyrants like Grindelwald turn witches and wizards in America against Muggles, and it sort of led to a toxic view in the American wizarding government that only caused more problems. MACUSA was once again met with more problems in 1892, and at the time, their base of operations was still in Washington. However, an unforeseen uprising of the Sasquatch population caused another security breach. It was the MACUSA employees' job to attack any Sasquatch that stepped out of line, but they failed to do this, and this led to many Muggles needing to have their minds obliviated to forget what they had seen. MACUSA needed a new refuge, and over the course of several years, wizards infiltrated a construction team of a new building in New York. By the time the Woolworth building was completed, it could house both Muggles and wizards being able to enter with the correct spell to transform the building into a huge development that would finally be the permanent location for MACUSA. The only outer mark of MACUSA's new secret location was the owl carved over the entrance. That's all I have for you guys this week, but in the next Harry Potter history video, I will be discussing the 1920s, the time period that the Fantastic Beasts films take place in, so look out for that. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life and more of this little dude. If you like this video, hit that like button and subscribe. I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured on the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, become a patron today. Again, thank you so much for watching, and look out for more great Movie Flame videos on the way.